And Alex Palou wins again. Back-to-back races. He wins the Sancio Grand Prix.
Woo! Thank you, boys.
This track's terrible when you go off. They do a terrible job here, so they need to pick up their game. Anywhere you go off, you almost break your back every time. Done it a couple of times this weekend, so need a kick in the butt for this place. And Grosjean is a piece of crap. If you saw what he did in practice, he needs a punch in the face.
Welcome back to the DIVEBOMB IndyCar podcast on a dramatic week in the world of IndyCar. A race of Road America filled with drama, an absolutely crazy practice session, rivalries on track, a podcast favourite losing his seat off track. There's loads to talk about, and thankfully I've got both Archie and Ellie to join me to discuss all the drama from the week. But where else to start apart from the race at Road America? Once again, Alex Palou, the class of the field.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an action-packed weekend. I mean, we had a lot of incidents. We had another thrilling race with 444 on-track passes, including, I think it was 386 for position, which is quite something. It was the most since, I think they started counting in 2016 at Road America. And as you said, Alex Palou again, showing his class. Maybe he wasn't quite the deserving winner. Colton Herta seemed to be on track to win before his strategy didn't play out as he would have liked. But Alex Palou was there to pick up the pieces, and when he did pass Herta with 7 laps to go, he managed to create quite a gap ahead of Joseph Newgarden.
Yeah, maybe he wasn't the favourite for the victory, but yet again, when he did get out in front, he was just the class of the field, and that could have well been 4 races in a row run if it wasn't for the Indy 500. 74 points clear of Marcus Ericsson in second place, and we kind of touched on last week. Maybe we can't quite say yet Palou's going to win the title, but with that result, you just think it's going to take some serious stopping.
Yeah, I think it seems pretty insurmountable at this stage. It's just his consistency is mind-blowing, really. He just manages to bring out these sort of results week in, week out. I think his worst finish of the season was 8th in the season opener. And since then, it's just been a constant upward trajectory, and he's the class of the field at the moment. I don't think, as it is now, I can see anyone stopping him with the margin that he's already built.
Yeah, I think he's doing so well as well. He's always towards the front of the field. He's always kind of, sometimes you never forget that he's on the track, and he's just someone that I think every driver should definitely watch out for.
Yeah, for his entire career, Palou's always been spoken about for his consistency, but this year he's just ramped it up another level, and whilst others may flounder, you just never see Palou have an issue. He's just so reliable. He's so formidable. NBC call him Professor of Precision, and it's not wrong. Every lap he's perfect. He just doesn't make mistakes. Well, we had a bit of an incident in practice too, and we'll talk about that later. But he's just so formidable, and he just cannot be stopped the way he drives and how formidable he is.
Yeah, I think, as you said, he had quite a big off actually in practice too, which, yeah, we will go into more depth on that session. But it's the way that he managed to just bounce back from that as if it didn't happen, bounce back from it, qualified 3rd later that day. And then, yeah, in the race, he did what he had to do to get his 3rd win in 4 races.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant from both Palou and Ganassi, but I do think we need to touch on the quite unlucky Colton Herta. It was, I think, the first time this year we've seen the Colton Herta that we all want to see. Sensational weekend. Herta might have even picked Palou for the drive of the weekend. He was absolutely sensational, but the one lap strategy gamble failed miserably for Andretti, and it's disappointing to see Herta finish all the way down to 5th for a weekend he definitely deserved to win.
Yeah, I mean, he qualified 2nd at St. Pete, and then since then it's just been, I think before Road America, 7th was his best start. He didn't start inside, and he didn't start inside the top 14 for, I think, the 4 races prior to Road America. So it was a welcome return of pace for him, because I wouldn't say people were starting to doubt him, but he was in a bit of a rut. He found some pace, and he seemed like the driver who was going to win that race for the vast majority. But as you said, the strategy gamble, it didn't pay off. And it's interesting whether that's something to do with the fact that, his dad's not on his strategy stand anymore. That could be part of it. He's still trying to get used to, not working with his dad. Yeah, to be fair, he put in a strong weekend and he couldn't have driven much better. And yeah, it's hopefully for him momentum to carry forward, because it hasn't been a very good start to the season at all.
Yeah, and he's finally the lead Andretti in the standings now, ahead of both Kirkwood and Grosjean. And he came fourth in Long Beach, but he wasn't on the pace as Kirkwood and Grosjean were. This was the first weekend where we saw the Colton Herta that we kind of expect from him a couple of years ago. And I really do hope he takes this as a confidence boost. We kind of see him, once he gets one result, he does tend to go on a little bit of a streak for good results. That's happened a couple of times before in his career, so hopefully, and we'll see him pick up again. Because when Colton Herta's on it, he's brilliant to watch. I really hope he can take this as a confidence boost and improve his form for the rest of the season. He hasn't won in a while now, actually, as Herta, so really hopefully he gets a win soon down the line.
Yeah, and I mean, he seemed quite disappointed after yesterday's race as we are recording. Yeah, I think maybe a few days he'll reflect on it and think, you know what, bigger picture, it's a boost, and maybe you can use it to get some improved results comparative to what he's had so far this season. Yeah,
absolutely. And a massive couple of rounds for Herta. So a lot of tracks he's been very good at before. So Mid-Ohio, Toronto, Nashville, Indy. Definitely a lot of potential here coming to this kind of summer stretch. At some circuits he's really good at, which could be hopefully massive for him. Maybe not a championship panel, I don't think really anyone is, but hopefully towards the upper end of the standings.
Because he can take, you've already said that he can take this as a confidence booster, but to know that you can be ahead and to know that you can qualify well, you can definitely take that into the races, and it is definitely something to carry on. And I think sometimes it's not always about the performance that you get, but the confidence that you get from it. And I think that's very important for him moving on.
Yeah, Herta drove absolutely supremely, it has to be said. He did nothing wrong. He dealt with all of the caution restarts fantastically. I've got to say that there were a lot of caution restarts, and he dealt with all of them expertly. And at the end of the day, it was his team's strategy which let him down. He drove as well as he could, and fifth place, which was really unrepresentative of the day that he deserved to have. We touched on Palou. Finished in P2 was Joseph Newgarden. Similar to Palou, actually, it's a track that Newgarden goes on very, very well at historically. Pretty good result for Newgarden, all things considered. But he was also actually a bit disappointed he didn't win in the end.
Yeah, I actually thought it was a fantastic weekend for Newgarden. He's still, they've said, not quite in his routine after the 500. Obviously, it takes a while to... He had the week prior to Detroit where it was just full-on media commitments. I guess that has just started to settle down now, so he can start to settle into a rhythm again. But Penske weren't really on the pace, especially first practice. They were way down the order. Newgarden, though, seemed to just outdrive his car, or got it in a sweet spot. Qualified fourth, which was very strong, and then he was just super aggressive in the race. He had a moment where he pushed Christian Lundgaard off the track. Lundgaard was disappointed not to get a penalty, but it seems the precedent they've set there, and maybe we'll come on to some of the race control decisions in a bit, but it seems the precedent for that is that there will be no penalty. So Newgarden, as he showed with the 500, where he was weaving, over the pit lane line, he knows how to get the most out of his races by staying just within the rules. There was a bit of wheel banging. There was even one stage where he went wheel to wheel with Scott McLaughlin, his bus bro, which was interesting. But yeah, it was really solid in the race to end up second. It was impressive.
Yeah, definitely one of his best, probably his best road course on the calendar for Newgarden. Obviously, he got good result here. Similarly for Palou, actually, I'd say. Probably Road America's his best road course on the schedule, so both of them really maximised what they could out of today. And Newgarden did touch on, I can't remember what restart it was, but there was one where there's loads of lap cars out of position, and basically Newgarden said he selected the wrong lane and Palou got past him, and that's where he says he lost the race today. So interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, he could say that's when he lost the race, but really when Palou managed to get clear of Herta, and it wasn't really difficult for Newgarden to get past Herta. He didn't lose much time in doing so. I think Palou still looked like he had the superior pace. So, yeah, maybe Newgarden does think he could have fended off Palou, but it did look in those closing stages when it really matters that Palou had that advantage.
Yeah, rounding out the podium, Pato Award. Thankfully for me, I sort of recovered. Good result for Roy Ward, actually. Again, a track he hasn't gone up fantastically, and after kind of the last two dismal races, it was a good effort from Ward, particularly after kind of the chaos that he ensued in lap 1, and very much calmer and consistent Pato Ward that we saw today.
Yeah, I mean, he qualified second, which was, again, it was a big boost for him. He really needed a result, but that didn't actually tell the whole story of front row start, because contact with Kyle Kirkwood on the first lap meant he dropped down, I think, to around 7th.
Yep.
And then the only moment that, was kind of, I didn't really like from him was the blocking of Ferrucci on the, at quite high speed, whether, maybe we give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe didn't see him, but he got dropped back 2 places for that. And the consensus was that that might actually have been quite a lenient penalty. Other than that, he drove well. He recovered from getting a penalty from the incident with Kirkwood. So, yeah, it was a more measured drive, and that's what we need to see more from him.
Yeah, and he kind of picked his way through each driver very well, and he kept it calm. And as I said, Road America's not his best circuit, and he's got a very decent result here. And I think it's got to be said about Pato Ward. He is, in the grand scheme of things, a lot more consistent. Yes, the results necessarily haven't shown that, but he said McLaren have had top 3 pace every single weekend, and had results gone his way slightly, that's probably more than feasible. And I think it's not quite Palou consistency, but he's starting to get there. And if he can iron out these couple of incidents that he's had, maybe next year, a couple of years' time, he's going to be right at the front of the standings.
Yeah, I agree. I think we just need to see, because it's been a Jekyll and Hyde season in a way for him. He's had these races where he does these, slightly silly misjudgments, and then he's also had races where he has been perfectly measured. And when he does have those races where he doesn't make those slightly miscalculated moves, then he almost always finishes top 5. So that is what we need to see more from him, because that would be championship form, as Palou has shown.
I think we did touch on Kyle Kirkwood, but he's starting to make a bit of a habit of these lap 1 incidents and sensational recovery. So ended up 9th to Kirkwood after, well, obviously he was at fault this time for hitting O'Ward, but a pretty solid effort recovering to 9th after being almost a lap down. And again, he's really, really starring this season.
Yeah, I think he's definitely up there with my drivers of the season. I know this one was his fault and he can't be making those errors, but the way he's driving is, to recover through the field, it's incredibly mature. And I think it's easy to forget it's only his 2nd year in IndyCar, but he's showing why he was an Indy Lights champion. And this is maybe what we expected from him. And the slightly rough year at Foyt took away from that slightly. Maybe the expectations were a bit lower, and that could be benefiting him. But yeah, he's showing some excellent racecraft to just seamlessly really make his way up through the field. And it, we'll also get onto him, but it's a bit like Scott Dixon. He's shown himself to be a master of this sort of recovery drive, and he's proving that nothing's really impossible in IndyCar because of the standard of the racing, and how easy it can be to pass drivers and race wheel to wheel. So yeah, Kirkwood's been one of my standout performers, I think, so far this season.
Got to say, another driver really stood out, Christian Lundgaard. We've documented RLL struggles this year, but it seems on every road course, Lundgaard's a very, very strong package, kind of constantly contending for the Fast 6 and constantly in the upper echelons of the standings. And again, very, very solid effort from Lundgaard. He's also really impressed me, considering what we said, how bad Rahal has been this year. He actually sits 11th in the standings, despite how bad they've been in ovals. So again, a lot of encouragement to take from Lundgaard.
Yeah, I mean that's outstanding. The road course races, he's not qualified outside the top 7. He was pretty unfortunate not to make the Fast 6 this weekend. He only marginally missed out, and then he manages to convert it in the races as well. And I think actually on the whole, it was a slightly stronger weekend for the Rahal team. Graham Rahal came home 11th, which is a much needed result for him. He also qualified fairly well, started 14th, I think. So he only marginally missed out on transferring to the Fast 12. I think Jack Harvey's another conversation we might need to have, because he was nowhere near really being on the pace with his teammates. I think they've had a bit of a reshuffle since Detroit, maybe. They've switched some personnel around. Yeah, their road course form has been all right. They've just got to find that consistently on, all sorts of tracks.
Yeah, 7th was actually Lundgaard's lowest finishing position on a road course this year, which is actually pretty insane. But even towards the end of last year, we saw him very strong at places like Laguna Seca, Indy, Portland. It's really remarkable how Lundgaard shows his form, and I think he's a driver who's becoming very quickly underrated with how he's driving such an average car this season.
Yeah, I actually think I can see him winning a race on one of the remaining road courses. I think he's possibly the most likely next first-time winner. He seems to be, he's got the pace on road courses more or less. At the moment, obviously, it seems like a matter of who can stop Alex Palou, but I can see Lundgaard being one of those people on road courses that can genuinely contend for wins, if not this season, definitely in seasons to come.
If Roman Grosjean has anything to say about that, whether he's going to be a bit of a talking point later on in the episode, I feel.
Speaking of someone who was in the contention for winning, well, maybe not winning, but he was up there, Marcus Armstrong. He did really well at the beginning, and then he managed to get up to P1. But I think I'm pretty sure that's because everyone pitted, and he managed to stay out. And he was on track for a really good race until everyone pitted and he stayed out. So it was one of them bad strategies, which I think could have worked, but it didn't really fall out the way that everyone expected it to.
Well, yeah, leading the race was actually kind of Armstrong's downfall, because I don't understand the rationale behind it, really. It was something about not thinking they could make the alternates last, I think. But yeah, it didn't make much sense to me. But, you've got to, as a rookie, look at the bigger picture, and he will have learnt a lot over the course of the weekend, and a lot of positive things. He was often actually faster than some of his teammates, and his teammates are good drivers. So qualifying 8th, I think he's got qualifying sorted already. Really, he's already sort of making a name for himself as a solid qualifier, and he made up a load of places at the start. He was running inside the top 3. He was battling with the likes of Newgarden, Rossi. Showing good form in wheel-to-wheel combat, really, and he genuinely looked like a bet for the podium before. It was just a confusing strategy, really. I still can't really understand what they were thinking, and it ruined his race from there. He had a couple of offs after that. I think he ended up on the grass a couple of times, but it didn't really mean anything.
Almost stuck up Palou on the final lap.
Yeah, that was interesting. It looked quite close. He said it was under control, but yeah, it looked very, very close, and that would have been quite something. But yeah, I think Armstrong has really found his feet very quickly, especially when you consider he hasn't done the oval, so that was only his 6th race, and he's already looking like he's up there as a podium contender. So yeah, credit to him. Yeah,
impressive result. Obviously, not on paper, unfortunately. Best rookie, Canapino watch. It was quite a lowly P19, but Canapino actually had a moment in the race, didn't he? I mean, it was a fairly good race, apart from he had a bizarre moment where he went off at the final corner. I think he fell right the way to the back there.
Yeah, he did have a moment. That was quite early in the race, wasn't it? It was a bit of a quieter weekend for Canapino. He wasn't really the standout rookie, because we'll probably go on to Benjamin Pedersen as well, but he was pretty strong. But yeah, Canapino, again, he's managing to get these results. He was right. He was right behind his teammate again. So yeah, fair play to him. I think Joseph Newgarden made a comment about him, didn't he?
Yeah.
After
most
Detroit,
impressive drivers he's ever seen or something.
Yeah, that was quite some credit for him, and yeah, he is doing a really good job.
Yeah, and I think we'll speak more about Canapino next week when you find out what that episode is. But yeah, again, a very solid effort. Best rookie. I appreciate that isn't wholly representative, but although he's quiet for the right reasons. He's not doing anything wrong, and he's not miles off the pace, which is always what you want. As we keep on praising him, I think you can't really praise him enough, considering the background he's come from, the turnaround he's had. He just continues to impress every week. So again, very decent weekend for Canapino. He actually posted quite a funny tweet where he qualified. I think it was next to Power, Dixon, Grosjean, and Pagenaud or something. And he was comparing himself to the sort of legends of IndyCar, which was quite a funny moment. But yeah, kind of shows the fact that he's around that pack is pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, he's really impressive. He just seems to have found his feet so quick with little fuss at all. Because yeah, he had a minor off in that race, but barring the odd incident, he's barely had, especially compared to other rookies, he barely seems to have had any accidents. And considering it was his first venture into single seaters, yeah, he's doing an almighty job, really.
I think quiet is what he needs. Well, like what he needs. I think because quiet doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. I think he's staying out of trouble, which I feel like is good considering he's a rookie. It means that he can get more time to kind of get to know the car a bit more, and considering it's literally his first season in any sort of like car like this, I think this is what he needs, and hopefully he can take all of this information that he's gathered and he can like really put it into next season or even the rest of this season.
Absolutely, definitely something for him to take forward. I think it might be time to touch on the elephant in the room. Will Power and his crazy weekend. So we'll start off with practice 2, where he had a bit of an incident with Romain Grosjean, where kind of Grosjean blocked him at the kink. Pretty dangerous. And then a bizarre accident with Scott Dixon, where Dixon let the car in front of him through, who I think actually was Grosjean, and then didn't see Power coming. Completely sideswiped Power. They had quite a major accident. Power revealed his middle fingers at Dixon and had a bit of an altercation with Dixon. And then when we thought that was enough action, he had a pretty shoddy qualifying because he had a replaced car. And then I think his interview was one of the greatest things I have ever watched.
Yeah, I mean, starting at the incident, I think Dixon was recovering from a spin. He was very apologetic about the whole thing. You know, he owned up to it, and he has done multiple times, said, you know, that's my fault. You know, it was a rare Scott Dixon error, but Power was absolutely incensed. He got straight out of the car, charged over, he was gesturing, he grabbed Dixon, shoved him, then went back for seconds, it looked like, while the safety crew were trying to separate him. Dixon kind of looked a tiny bit bemused by the whole reaction, but it was understandable. It was a massive crash, and it was into a concrete wall as well. It wasn't like it was a place on the track where, you know, they're really anticipating coming togethers like that. Yeah, I think it was a heat of the moment thing for Power. They got in the medical car together, and it seemed like it had all kind of calmed down a little bit until qualifying, when Power realised his car, after, you know, he was having to be pretty much put back together with all sorts of new parts. His car wasn't performing, and that's when he suddenly realises, well, this is Dixon's fault. So he makes a comment over the radio, I think, blames Dixon, and then came the absolute masterpiece of an interview, really. And I think maybe still on this later that evening, when things had calmed down a bit, because this is also in Power's interview. He went and absolutely laid into the track and called the surface terrible when you go off, and he's almost breaking his back, and they need a kick in the butt. And yeah, he was going pretty crazy. But then I think it was the track president went and parked a sewage truck in front of Power's bus as punishment for those comments. Left the keys in it. Power drives it over and parks it in front of Dixon's bus, which is all rather petty. But it was a I suppose a decent way for it to blow over. And they were laughs and jokes the morning after, before the race. So they seem to have made up. But oh my god, I think then you had the other bit of Power's interview where he spoke about Grosjean.
possibly the greatest 10 seconds of television I've ever seen. So just, if you haven't seen it, quote for quote, Grosjean is a piece of crap. If you saw what he did in practice, he needs a punch in the face. I think we were all kind of watching it in complete bemusement, but it was rather entertaining. Grosjean was a bit stupid, give or take, but I think the day that Power had, I think that all accumulated in quite an angry interview.
Yeah, it seemed that Grosjean just caught strays, really, of Power's anger. And initially, I actually thought he was being sarcastic at the start of the interview, and he was like, the track do a terrible job and all of that. I thought it was sarcasm. And then he kept going. Yeah. And then he kept going. And I was like, oh, right, so he's meaning this. To be honest, though, this lack of filter, I mean, it's a common thing for the drivers. You often see it on social media and making comments, the Newgarden and Ferrucci thing last year, McLaughlin liking tweets about Grosjean after Detroit. It's brilliant for the series. Like, it's not the same as like F1 where it's boring, media training and, in the vast majority of other sports. Here, the drivers are just purely unfiltered. They'll just say what they want. And that's great. You need that sort of rivalry. And it was like the new willpower that won him the championship last year kind of disappeared for a bit. But then he did restore his calm, and it kind of seemed that, I don't mind this, have a bit of bite in him, but then also be that sort of renewed, more measured willpower on track. So, yeah, it was incredibly fun, and it'll be one of the highlights of the season, I think, when we look back on it.
Yeah, I think quite an underappreciated moment, actually, which I'm actually quite sad that Power didn't have more reaction to. But in the race where Grosjean overtook him and then just barged him off track was particularly entertaining for me. Going into the carousel, yeah, quite a funny moment. Grosjean trying to get his revenge. I'm pretty sure Grosjean made some funny comments on Instagram too. It was sort of like bemused comments. So yeah, a whole saga, which is very, very funny.
Yeah, and hopefully it continues into future races. I mean, Grosjean seems to have upset all of the Penske drivers now. The final nail in the coffin with McLaughlin in Detroit, and then you had Newgarden, he had a bit of contact with in Detroit, and now Power seems to think he's a piece of crap. So, yeah, that was fun.
Not making many friends. I think
No.
While we are talking about Grosjean, I think it didn't get any better for him in the race, let's be honest here. So he was running all right, then he kind of had that initial spin in turn 3, and then from there on, it just progressively got worse and worse, really.
I mean, he had a pretty wretched qualifying. He had a spin, I think, that kind of set him back a little bit. I think he got going again. It didn't cause a red flag, but started 19th. Not great. It's kind of just shows this form he had at some point just seems to be diminishing. He's out of rhythm, really. He seems to be lacking confidence. I think then caused a red flag with a spin in warm-up, and then whenever the camera seemed to cut to him, at least in the second half of the race, he seemed to be off the track. He caused one of the cautions after getting beached. He seemed to spend a lot of time on the grass. That car almost looked like it had some problem with it, and I hope for his sake it did, because it was, if not, it was just you can't put it much better than it was just an awful, awful performance, really. There was even, I think it was maybe Marshall Pruitt's podcast or something, they were questioning, he said he'd spoken to a few people who actually questioned whether Grosjean's suspension really failed in Detroit, or whether, because it didn't, like, when you look, I've looked back at the crash and it didn't really look like it was something that was a legacy of a suspension failure. And,
No.
they said it was a suspension failure, so we'll take it for the word. But he seems to just crash a lot at the moment, and he can't keep doing that.
Do you reckon it's something to do with how at the beginning of the season he was doing kind of like so well, and now like he's slowly seeing it like slip away, like mistake by mistake, and every time he's getting just like a little bit like more desperate and like knowing in his head that he can do it, but for some reason he's just like not been able to.
I mean that's a viable point, really. A little bit like O'Ward, I guess, but to an even greater extent. I think he's just, I don't know. It's hard to diagnose really what's going on with him, but there's something not right that's just causing him to have all these incidents.
He's either really unlucky with the car, or it's it's just something that he needs to work through.
Yeah, I mean, Grosjean's only top 10 finishes this year was 2 podiums, which he obviously achieved in Long Beach and Alabama, and it's just remarkable. He lies 13th in the point standings, which is just kind of sort of embarrassing for Grosjean, considering how quickly he's fallen off this year.
I mean, it still doesn't feel that long ago that we were speaking about him as like one of the drivers of the year, but it's just that seems far fetched now, really, because he has shown pace, but was having incidents, and now it seems that he's crashing and not having pace. So yeah, he needs to just reset, really.
Yeah, definitely is. I don't know what's happened, because it's not like as a team they're falling off the pace, because as a team they're still very strong. It's just personally just something's happened to him, and it's something we saw last season as well. There was just so many incidents, and it's just frustrating because Grosjean's got the pace, but he just doesn't convert it, which is the biggest problem, because at the end of the day, it's the results that matter. Touching on that incident with Palou earlier, Scott Dixon, very, very impressive recovery from him yet again.
Yeah, well, I mean, his qualifying wasn't great, but I think he had a completely new car for that, so that was kind of excusable. He had a bit of a spin. He started 23rd, I think. But the race was spectacular. It was a classic Scott Dixon drive. Before you knew it, you would, looked at the TV, he's up inside the top 10. You're like, how did he get there? But, it's Scott Dixon, so you kind of have to expect that. He is the master of this sort of thing. He kind of just smoothly made his way up without much fuss, and then by the end he was 4th, and maybe another lap and he could have snatched the podium off Pato O'Ward as well. So yeah, I mean, a podium would have been the icing on the cake, but it was a fantastic, fantastic race from him. It might go down as one of the drives of the season, I think, considering where they were after the incident on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. What a recovery. And Dixon's form, again, it's just sort of Chip Ganassi consistency. Finished top 7 every race this year, apart from Long Beach, where, let's be honest, probably would have finished in the top 7. Sensational form. He just quietly, is such Scott Dixon fashion, just picks up the results week in, week out, whatever happens.
Yeah, it does feel like he's had quite an understated season, really. I mean, how many times has he been on the podium? Once. Yeah, so it's been quite understated, but he's still up there in 5th in the championship level on points with O'Ward. So whether anyone can mount that charge towards Palou, it's hard to tell. But Dixon certainly seems to have the consistency, even when he is out of position to start with.
Absolutely. And again, talking of Chip Ganassi consistency, Marcus Ericsson, another very Marcus Ericsson day. It just doesn't really seem to be anywhere, and just ends up getting a decent top 10 result yet again.
Yeah, 6th. I mean, there was one stage where I think they were saying in the booth that maybe he looked good for the possibly contend for the win because of his strategy. That didn't quite work out, but yeah, it was a quiet weekend really for Ericsson, but he doesn't seem to do many flashy things really. Yeah, there's not much to say on him really. There never seems to be masses to say other than the fact that he finds his way inside the top 10 and still up there in 2nd in the championship somehow, which is it's odd seeing him in 2nd in the championship. It doesn't really feel like he's done much to get there, but fair play to him. He's ultra consistent, and as we often speak about, consistency is so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ericsson, just the issue with this, you just know he's not going to be a championship contender. Like, great, he's fantastic at picking up top 10 results, but it's kind of that extra 2 or 3 places each race which he struggles at. And if he had that, maybe we could see him against the likes of Palou. But I think Ericsson's consistency is admirable, but he's just not as fast as everyone else, which I think is probably what his downfall is. And at the end of the day, we saw it last season. It massively helps with results, but at the end of the season, it's just not going to quite be at the front. I think it is time, probably, to touch on one of the podcast favourites who, let's just say, is no longer with us, Conor Daly. Obviously, a bit of a shock announcement last week that he was leaving Ed Carpenter Racing and being replaced by Ryan Hunter-Reay. Hunter-Reay still seems to be on a race-by-race basis, actually, which is something we can chat on later. But yeah, sad to see Conor Daly go in what has been a real shock announcement.
Yeah, I mean, it took a while to process it, really. I think it was pretty gutting news, and that seems to have been the consensus throughout the IndyCar community. It was a decision that Ed Carpenter said was necessary to elevate the competitiveness of the team. Make of that what you will. The question really was initially from us, like, has he lost his sponsorship or something? But no, Bit Nyla staying on board with the team, which is all the stranger, really. And you know how hard drivers work for their sponsors as well. That Daly was the one who seemed to bring them on board. Yeah, as it is, it seems he's kind of been scapegoated for what appears collective underperformance, really. I mean, looking on track, he was 20 points behind VK in the championship, but he led 4-3 in terms of race results, which, kind of outlines the consistency that Daly has. He rarely, put cars in the wall, which we did see from Hunter-Reay this weekend. Daly's kind of, I think, reliable is a good word to describe his IndyCar career. In his full-time seasons, I think there have been 5 of them, he's finished either 17th or 18th in the championship, which, it isn't outstanding, but he's never had the car to really compete towards the front, and it sort of outlines that he is a consistent driver. Maybe he's not on the level of VK, but VK, after all, is a guy who is younger and being chased by some of the, the bigger teams in the series. So for me, it was a strange decision. I didn't agree with it. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a bit of a bizarre move. Yes, Daly hasn't performed for years, and if you were to pick anyone from that team, it would be Conor Daly. But when you're replacing someone like Ryan Hunter-Reay, is that really a massive asset? Yes, I appreciate Ryan Hunter-Reay's got years of experience, but he doesn't bring anything extra that Conor Daly doesn't. The whole point for him was to guide them with setup and whatever, but even if he's on a race-by-race basis, suggested he doesn't bring any benefit to the team. Bringing Hunter-Reay instead of Daly does absolutely nothing. And although it's sad to see Daly go, if you were to replace him, I don't see why someone like Linus Lundqvist is still sitting on the sidelines despite being linked to ECR, because he brings in that youth. He brings in something to look forward to, and he's an unknown factor to Linus Lundqvist, and he's an IndyCar champion. And yeah, they've picked Hunter-Reay over him. It's a bizarre decision, and I think the initial Daly one was bizarre, but then when they announced it was Hunter-Reay, you're just, what's the point? Why?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like a decision that they haven't given much thought. Daly said that he didn't even know about it in Detroit, which says a lot, given the decision was made not long after that race. I get the argument that they're looking for someone who might be able to help with setups and stuff, help stabilise things, and Hunter-Reay's experience could offer that. However, if it's a race-by-race basis still, and he said he's not 100% sure that he'll be there for Mid-Ohio, even though he expects he will be, that doesn't point towards them thinking, like, long-term, this guy's going to stabilise us. And then you mentioned Lundqvist, but you don't really want to bring a rookie in mid-season because that's not going to elevate the team's competitiveness. To me, it just didn't seem like the right time. I mean, focusing on Hunter-Reay, he's not going to bring results. Like, you can't really. He's been out of the series for the best part of 18 months, really, season and a half. He was 17th in his last full-time season. That was with Andretti as well. He was 199 points behind Herta in the championship, who was his leading teammate. He wasn't someone who was actively looking for a seat either. I don't understand it. I mean, Daly, he came out on his podcast and he's often unfiltered, says a lot of stuff, but it was made all the stranger by the fact he couldn't really say anything, and he seemed quite deflated by the whole thing. And is there a way back for him? That's the question now. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
You look at the driver market and you think where could you realistically go? I'm not sure if any teams would sign Conor Daly to an upgrade. What I'd like to see Daly do is I think he'd be brilliant on an oval only schedule next year. I think he's definitely more suited to ovals than he is the road courses. He always goes so well at Indy, and there was an announcement. I think I can't remember the series, but he's driving for Dry and Reinbold in some series, and obviously they're an Indy 500 team.
Cross.
Nitro Cross, that's it.
Yeah.
And I think he's already got that link, so potentially looking at an Indy 500 entry next year already could be something good. A decent team for him to run with. So some options on the table, but full time, I'm not sure there is much of a way back for Conor Daly, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think Daly did say that, people are trying, but something that I picked out from his podcast was he kept pointing to having listened to the Marshall Pruitt podcast, where Pruitt kind of went into a bit more detail about the situation. And the bit that I picked out from that is that he said that the relationship was a bit frayed between Daly and the team. I feel like that kind of comes with a lack of performance anyway. The tension, that probably created the tension, really. Pruitt said that the decision was a shock to him, but not fully a shock. It's interesting. He doesn't see a way that Daly gets back in, really. I think apparently there was even a bit of tension between Daly and Bitnile, which is a big thing. Bitnile are on his Nitro Cross car, but only in quite a small way. So it could be a situation where not only does Daly need to find a team, but he also needs to find a sponsor. And that is a real challenge, I think. And it could ultimately turn out that he maybe is done full-time in IndyCar, in which case it would be one of those horrible stories of a driver with potential that's a bit unfulfilled, really. And Daly is obviously a big loss as well. He speaks so passionately about IndyCar. He is so intent on growing the series. And I think not having him in the series week in, week out is a massive, massive loss. His personality will be missed sorely.
I don't know if one of you have mentioned, but on the it was on Instagram, the official note being we mutually agreed, and then a post later it was him and his fiance, I want to say, or girlfriend or something, and then in the caption he's not mutually agreed. So he obviously didn't want to go, so it was a decision that was made out of his reach.
Yeah, and as we said, I don't think Daly's performed badly as such. I think VK is someone people definitely need to keep an eye on more, because he's always been hyped up as this huge talent, this Indy Lights winner who will eventually find his way to the top. But his performances haven't been good, particularly this year. His only top 10 was Indianapolis, which is a track ECR always go well at, and that was only after he hit Alex Palou and had all the chaos in the middle of it. And I think, why isn't Rena's VK having more question marks over his name? There's links to him going to a Ganassi seat, and I find that beyond me, because he's not even performing well in ECR at the minute.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I feel like VK hasn't really been on form. Obviously, the 500 he performs well, but Daly actually ended up finishing that race ahead of him in the end because of the error in the pits that led to the collision with Palou. He had a stronger weekend, actually. Road America VK finished 12th, but he's not showing to be like the driver, that's being linked to these big teams. Maybe we'll come on to it, but he had quite a clumsy race, actually, at Road America, despite finishing 12th. He was involved in one of the many incidents in the race, with a collision with Felix Rosenqvist. I don't know with VK, really. It's a difficult one, because I think the statement mentioned that it was the decision to drop Daly was based on performance grounds in 2023. They'd been disappointed with their performances so far this year. In which case, Daly really wasn't that far adrift of VK. There were occasions where he qualified in the same row. He was having, on the whole, as I mentioned, better races than VK. So, I don't really know. I don't understand it. If you're going to get rid of Daly, then VK maybe is performing slightly better than him, but I don't think it was fair to single out one of the drivers and say you are the reason for our underperformance, because the reality is it's not a driver that is the issue. I think they had maybe a bit of a technical reshuffle that hasn't worked out. I don't know. It's just a situation that's a bit beyond me, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's definitely sad to see someone like Conor Daly who's so passionate for the series and just so enthusiastic all the time, and he's such a great character to lose him. Obviously, we'll be honest, he's not one of the best drivers in the field, but as an asset to IndyCar, I think it's massive, and I don't know if it ever will happen, but I think if he ever goes down like the commentary route, that'd be absolutely fantastic. I think IndyCar definitely needs to keep him as an asset because he would be a great loss.
Oh, absolutely. He would be. I mean, he'd be a natural in the booth with them. Him and Hinch would be fantastic together.
Absolutely.
Obviously, both with their own IndyCar podcasts and stuff. So, yeah, that would be nice to see.
Yes, touching back on Red America, we obviously mentioned right at the start had 400 and something overtakes, an absolute mental race. Really hard fought racing, very aggressive racing. Obviously, that created a lot of incidents, a lot of dramatic penalties, a lot of kind of to speak about on that front.
Yeah, I mean, it was excellent racing. It was proper elbows out. The drivers seem to enjoy it. You know, there's some wheel banging, but the cars are built so well. Like, you don't often see wheel banging result in, I don't know, suspension braking and stuff. I think the drivers are happy. You know, they can give out a bit of tough racing, wheel banging, as long as they're happy to receive it. And on the whole, they seem generally happy to receive it. I think, yeah, there's a need to touch on some of the penalties. I felt there was a little bit of inconsistency. You had the O'Ward blocking situation. He had to give up 2 places. That was a bit of question whether he maybe should have got a bit of a more severe penalty. Don't know about that. But then Ray Hall also got penalised for blocking, but he only had to give up 1 place, as far as I'm aware anyway. I think the big one, though, with no penalty was, as I briefly touched on, was VK just spinning Rosenqvist. It was a late move, and yeah, I was a bit unsure how that wasn't a penalty when Kirkwood got penalised. I don't know what the penalty was for the O'Ward contact, but did he drop back to the back of the field? I saw him dropping back at one point.
He was at the back anyway, so yeah.
Oh yeah.
Not really sure.
Then, as I mentioned, you had quite a lot of drivers forcing each other off the track. That doesn't seem to be something that's penalised, which, okay, fine, the precedent does seem to be set for that, but I'm not sure it seems completely fair at times. Some drivers just getting completely screwed over by being pushed onto the grass.
Yeah, particularly at turn 5, where you've got that big rumble strip, and there were many occasions where drivers lost 2 or 3 places by being forced wide. Lingard was one. I'm tempted to say Armstrong might have been another at some point. There were a couple who fell victim of that.
Yeah, another one was Ferrucci after contact with his teammate. Him and Benjamin Pedersen came together. And actually, that kind of brings me on to talking about Foyt, because they had a much better weekend in terms of a road course race. Both got into the Fast 12. I think, I might have heard this wrong, I think it was the first time they said since 2018 that 2 Foyt cars have been in the Fast 12.
On a road course.
On a road course, okay.
Because they both got into it in Indy, obviously. So
Great point. I think it was, to be fair, that a team like Foyt, who have been struggling so much, can suddenly find that form again. As we are big sort of advocates for the series, it just shows how competitive it is and how certain teams making mistakes or being slightly out of the window can mean other teams are just able to slot in and suddenly be fighting up near the front. I think shout out to Benjamin Pedersen. He qualified 10th. It was his best start in IndyCar. I think, did he start 11th in the end for the 500? So that was really solid. Then the race was not quite as good, I think. Oh yeah, in fact, Pedersen himself got pushed off in the race. I think it was towards the start where there were quite a lot of cars sort of clumped up together. I think it was maybe Jack Harvey who ended up pushing him off slightly. Obviously inadvertently. I think there were a lot of cars kind of just got into each other ever so slightly. Pedersen got screwed by that, but then he ended up pushing off Ferrucci, I think, at one stage. So
Di Francesco as well qualified quite well in the end.
Well, yeah, Di Francesco qualified well. How did he end up finishing 23rd?
Who knows? He was towards the front for not the front, but you know what I mean, for the first stint, and then he kind of just disappeared.
Yeah, there's some bizarre situations like that. Felix Rosenqvist had a very strange race because he had the contact with VK that sent him off the track. he then recovered and was sort of up inside the top 10 ahead of Alexander Rossi at one stage, I think, and he felt like he was up there, and that would be a good recovery result, similar to Kirkwood and Dixon. But in the end, he ends up finishing 20th as well, which was quite a strange one. There was the other penalty incident actually I wanted to touch on was the unsafe releases. Marcus Armstrong was released unsafely. He got I think it was just a one place. He had to drop back a place. That hindered Simon Pagino maybe. But then VK for an unsafe release got dropped 11 places, which in fairness, that Kirkwood had to take slightly greater evasive action than Pagino did, but I don't know whether he had to drop back behind Kirkwood or something, or I think that might have been the case. But it seems a bit weird that for the same thing, one driver can get one place and then another driver can get 11 places. So, yeah, I'm not sure what went on there.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. So we'll quickly run through the running orders, just recapping the key points. Palou obviously won ahead of Newgarden, no Ward. Fourth place was Dixon's recovery drive of Herta, struggling to fifth in the end, quite fortunately. Ericsson, quite a day again, was sixth. Lundgaard pressed in seventh. Eighth place was McLaughlin. Fairly quite a day for McLaughlin, actually. I haven't touched on him, but didn't really do much, to be honest.
Yeah, I think he got scuppered a bit by the red flag in qualifying. He ended up starting 18th, I think. So he wasn't quite where he wanted to be, but he I think there was one stage he was on the back of Newgarden, but I think maybe slightly different strategies. He didn't quite have the pace of his teammate who ended up finishing second. Yeah, it was a fairly quiet weekend for him, but he's still up in sixth in the championship, albeit 125 points behind Alex Palou, which is quite a margin.
Ninth was Kirkwood, who recovered quite well. 10th ended up being Alexander Rossi, which is kind of disappointing because he did look like the man to beat at the start of the weekend, and then just didn't quite work out for him in the end.
Yeah, he was my pick for pole. I say that tentatively because it's obviously always quite hard to predict, and the field ended up being pretty mixed up. But yeah, it was. He topped. Did he top a practice session?
Both of them.
He topped both practice sessions. Which,
yep.
Actually, and talking of practice sessions, first practice was calm, orderly. Second practice, where we had the Dixon power incident, it was like a street course practice. It was ridiculous. There were 5 red flags. You had the Palou crash that we touched on. You had obviously the Dixon power thing. Ferrucci needed rebooting. Herta had a spin, and that was another thing. Yeah, Pagino went in the wall, but Herta, that's one thing. Touching back on Herta, he actually had quite a messy weekend en route to getting pole. I think he even had a spin in qualifying, maybe. He had a couple of spins in second practice, or at least ventures off the track. And I think she take this opportunity to mention the repave that in our interview with Stingray Rob that came out last week, he mentioned the repave sort of briefly when he was speaking about looking forward to Road America. I think some corners, the cornering speeds are up by about 10 miles per hour in some cases across the weekend. I think one of the big narratives was whether Dario Franchitti's lap record could be broken. I think it was a few tenths short in the end. I think Colton Herta was.
Yeah, I don't think the Reds were strong enough to do it in the end.
Yeah, I do think the repave maybe sort of led into some of the chaos that we had. Drivers maybe going a bit over the limit while trying to find what the limit was. But yeah, there's some proper speeds being clocked. It was I think that did lead into sort of what a fun weekend it was through practice, qualifying, and then into the race.
Yeah, what I did particularly enjoy about the repave was when we had that power interview, absolutely blasting the Road America repave, and then Rahal, a couple minutes later, just said this is the most epic repave we've ever had, which is quite the contradiction. Very entertaining to watch.
Oh, it was hilarious, honestly. That power interview, that will be remembered in years to come.
I remember the rest of the order. As we said, Rahal, much better weekend in 11th. VK ended up 12th. 13th went to Power after his crazy weekend. 14th, 15th with the Marshank crew. Bit of a better weekend for them this time around. 16th was Ferrucci. 17th ended up being Hunter Ray with 18th Ireland, 19th Canapino. 20th went to Rosenqvist, which was a bit of a bizarre weekend. Peterson, 21st, Rob. much quieter weekend for him, 22nd. 23rd was DiFrancesco. Armstrong's strategy ends up 24th. Grosjean 25th. With the 26th place, I forgot to say, we're going to Jack Harvey. It's a bit of a terrible weekend again, with Malukas being the only non-finisher.
Yeah, it was a bit disappointing actually for David Malukas in the end, because he was second in first practice, and it looked like it could have been one of those Malukas weekends from last season where he's up fighting near the front. He only just missed out from getting into the fast 12 actually, but his race was undone by some sort of mechanical issue, which was unfortunate. Yeah, it's not been his season so far. I think, I don't think it'll damage his reputation really. It shouldn't anyway, because he's an excellent driver. I think he still finished fourth, did he, in Texas, if I remember correctly? So that's still a result to behold, and I still think he'll be one that some of the bigger teams are looking at heading into next season. But it's not quite been his season so far. It's not really been Coyne's season so far on the whole, really.
A chaotic weekend, lots to touch on, lots to discuss, as we have done. I think the Will Power interview, it will always be my favourite moment of that weekend. I don't think much is going to top that this season. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. And there's no race next week, but don't worry, we'll be back. We've got our mid-season review. 8 rounds done, 9 to go. 8 events, obviously, as Iowa's a double header. So we'll have a special mid-season review, just recapping the first 8 races of the season, discussing who stood out, who hasn't stood out, and look forward to the rest of the season. Thanks for Archie and Ellie for joining me again, and hopefully we'll see you guys next week on the podcast. Have a good one, we'll see you then.